I think any company that has the numbers of people and the engagement that Facebook has will require everybody to continue to try and figure out a way to use that platform to sell your product, your service, whatever you have. I read that a lot of people are having difficulty doing that, but everybody's going to keep on trying. And I think if we look historically over other ways of communication and see how that developed over time, the history shows it takes a while to be able to come up with the methodologies to be able to be effective. But I think that given the numbers there will be a way. There has to be a way because that's where the people are. Whether it be advertising or sponsored stories or whatever it's going to be, people are going to continue to go. When I say people, the companies are going to continue to go where the people are to try and convince those people to use your service. But I agree, right now, it's not perfected yet.
There's just one thing I want to add. Although I don't see a lot of e-commerce happening actually on the Facebook feed, one of the places where Facebook actually you see marketplaces sort of growing is the Facebook groups. And I'm personally a member of several Facebook groups that are actual active marketplaces for vertical marketplaces for, in my case, it's geeky stuff, being a geek, and comic books and stuff like that. But I know from a friend that works on Facebook that there's actually a group on Facebook which is a marketplace for Facebook employees buying and selling things that they don't need. Yeah, and it's a closed group. Only Facebook employees are members of it. You have to be approved by someone to get in. And it's a very convenient and powerful marketplace because you bring stuff to work and it's easy for you, so delivery is not an issue. You trust the people completely, so there are no trust issues because they work with you on Facebook. Nobody's going to risk their Facebook reputation for such a transaction. And it's a very successful used goods marketplace. So I think Facebook groups or, like a subset of Facebook might actually become a very interesting marketplace.
I think, like Frederic, my experience or knowledge is more of the fashion industry than any other. And I think still within the fashion industry, consumers want a certain degree of exclusivity, if you like. I think just being one of 1 billion, is it 1 billion Facebook users nowadays? There's no exclusivity there as well. I think they also want a degree of curation. I think they want recommendations for what they're going to look like, what their styling is going to be. And I think it's unlikely that Facebook are ever going to move into direct e-commerce to the fashion industry. I think we'll see it more from brands like Net-a-Porter, for example, who are launching a social e-commerce site next year called Netbook. And some of the more trusted brands that already have that following and already have, Net-a-Porter is over 1 million individual users. So I think my view is it's unlikely that Facebook is ever going to be a storefront for the fashion industry. They'd probably like to be.
One point to add is that I think there's an interesting trend of, because we were talking about linking commerce to social media platforms, but increasingly what we see is the e-tailers extracting information from the social media platforms, so Facebook, but not only, Instagram, Pinterest or Twitter or others, and trying to use that content or those sort of social recommendations as a way to increase conversion or increase average order value. An interesting example is how as commerce becomes more and more visual, for instance, a lot of people are just posting pictures of themselves on Facebook or on Instagram wearing products and tagging them. There is a company in New York called Olapic, which enables brands, so people like Nasty Gal, people like Threadless, New Balance, etc., to extract pictures from social networks and to display them alongside products. So giving a kind of social endorsement to those products. And then you're able to see that product being worn by a normal person. And they've got very interesting data showing that they increase average transaction value and also increase conversion. So it's not going to work for everything. I guess for travel, it's slightly different because it's intangible. But I think there will be really opportunities to take social into e-commerce sites and to increase key metrics.
Okay. Frederic, Marc, you two are very familiar with the fashion industry. Could you tell us some of the key metrics for successful fashion sales over the internet? Key metrics for successful fashion sales over the internet.
I'm not sure I'm that qualified to answer. Frederic, do you want to have a go on that?
I would say that generally the metrics are the same for every commerce business. It's what's the cost of acquisition with the average transaction value per transaction, and what's the sort of average lifetime value, depending on how you define it. Whether you sell travel games or physical items, can you make a living?
In the fashion, you have the problem that people buying the clothes without.
Yeah, so you're right. When there's a physical element, there is another part of the metric, which is level of returns. And there it varies greatly. It's harder to return a travel product. You can write a bad review. You can return a pair of shoes that doesn't fit. And there it goes from anywhere from, let's say, selling it in Germany, shoes, that's very hard, 50% returns. RAD, that website mentions, goes 3% return. In fashion, another company I'm involved with, a company called Farfetch, which is more high fashion, it's got 11% returns. It varies greatly, but it's part of the equation. And so if you make a good margin per transaction, but are faced with 50% returns, but you've got to sell twice as much to make the same net margin than someone who's got no returns, basically.
Okay. Glenn, you are working at one of the most competitive industry, the travel industry. One of the strategies, as I see it, of Priceline Group is M&As and acquiring sites like you mentioned before, Kayak, Booking.com, and Agoda. How do you deal with the ongoing competition in this market?
It definitely is a very competitive industry. And not to bore you, but just to give you a sense of how things changed over time. When I first came to Priceline, we had problems. And in 2001, a lot of people thought our company was going to go bankrupt and disappear. And the market cap, we were a public company in the US, our market cap was just a few $100 million US. And now the market cap is over 50 billion US. And when I first came, we made no money. And in the last 4 quarters publicly, we had EBITDA, which is operating income plus depreciation, amortization, cash flow basically of 2.2 billion USD. Well, that happened because the market increased greatly, but it also was share shift, where we were one of the smaller people and other people were much bigger. Expedia was much bigger and Travelocity and all that. Things changed, and it definitely did change from the companies we bought. But when we bought them, those companies were insignificant. Nobody had heard of them, basically. And the way we were able to do it was no different than offline businesses, which is you try and focus on what you do well. I know it doesn't sound like some great secret sauce, but you try and focus on what you do well and focus just on that. So what we did is we focused only on the hotel business, whereas Expedia did airlines air tickets around the world and all sort of things around the world. And if you looked at some of the tour operators, they do all different things. We did only one thing for quite a while, which is hotels around the world. That was Booking.com and Agoda. And then after that started going very well, then we went out and bought the rentalcars.com company. But it really was that focused energy in one area. And so anybody here who's starting up a company, and I speak to a lot of startups here and everywhere, and I hear what the dreams and visions, and most times I hear, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And I say, stop. Pick one. You only have a certain amount of money and a certain amount of time. You must make that successful first before you do 2 and 3. And that really, I think, was the way, is that we had more focus on what ended up being the most profitable area of travel.
Marc, the next question is for you. Your company, STYLUS, deals with trends forecasting and helps companies use them to win over the competitors. Does e-commerce can give those brands or companies a real advantage?
I think it does. I think every company that we deal with obviously has some sort of e-commerce or some sort of online presence. But I think I know it's a bit of a buzzword, but innovation is really what keeps these companies ahead, and that's really what STYLUS is about. It's about tracking innovation in many different areas, and that's sort of that's a competitive edge that we try to bring to companies and try and provide them with. I think that is probably the core or the key to their success, more so than their online presence, is just staying one step ahead of the competition. It's about the product. At the end of the day, if their product isn't right, then it doesn't matter where they try and sell it, they're just not going to sell it. So it's more about the product development and understanding the consumer, and also how to sell the product as well once it's produced.
When you say product, you've seen the last few years, the most focus of companies that make physical products is the design. You see it in iPhone and iPad and Apple, and you see it in other places. You see it also in places like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, that the people that making physical, they're doing product design very well.
Yeah, I mean, at STYLUS we cover 20 different industries, so we cover anything from fashion, beauty, technology, automotive, really a cross-sector. And it's those companies that really understand that you can't just look at your own sector, your own vertical in isolation. You have to look at everything in the round to really be competitive today. My old business, which I sold 8 years ago, was purely focused on the fashion industry, and then just looking at fashion for the fashion industry was relevant. Today, if you're a smart fashion designer or you're creating campaigns for the fashion industry, you actually shouldn't even be looking at fashion content. You should be looking at architecture, at music, at cultural trends, at everything else apart from fashion, because if you're looking at fashion, it's already out there and it's already old news. So, yeah, I mean, it's really keeping full knowledge of the whole sector, but both in terms of understanding the consumer. So, I mean, we deal with product development, and that's product it can be anything from clothing to hotel chains to cars and media campaigns. But actually, unless you understand the consumer before you start to create that product, unless you understand how you're going to sell it when you've produced it, there's no point even bothering. So it's really, at STYLUS we focus on 3 different areas: consumer lifestyle, consumer product, and consumer engagement. And you have to have knowledge of all 3 to be successful.
Okay. Doron, your app, HappySale, deal with selling used items over the mobile phone?
Not just used, just sell everything.
Okay. So this is the question, by the way. Do you think people can sell anything over the
Yes,
the
I do. I think that people currently don't consider themselves able to sell everything that they have easily. I think the experiences of e-commerce for sellers are discouraging at best. So when we did the research before, starting to work on HappySale, we got feedback from people that say things from, I sometimes post to Craigslist, but there are a lot of creeps there, and I'm a little bit scared of that. And I maybe sometimes sell on eBay, but the experience is very difficult, and I'm not a power seller, so I don't do that for a living. I think marketplaces like Etsy did a great job in the past 5 years convincing people that they could be what we refer to as micro merchants. So basically, if you have a hobby, you can turn it into a lucrative option in your life and make some money off it by opening an Etsy store. But I think we haven't gone down all the way to really convince people that selling things is an easy, everyday action that you should be able to do. And I think HappySale is working very hard to create that experience and to really make people realize that, what do you mean? I can sell it 2 seconds away, and I'll get, some of my friends might need it, somebody's going to buy it.
Okay. Frederic, last question for this panel. You're very familiar with PayPal's president, David Marcus. You invested in his last startup before acquired by eBay Zong. Do you think a big company like PayPal have more impact on innovation on the e-commerce field than startups that are small and eager to do so?
That the big company has got more what, sorry? More?
So the question is a big company like PayPal have more impact on innovation on the field of e-commerce, or a startup that are small and can do things more quicker?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's always the challenge of continuing to bring innovation at a company of a large scale. One of the things, and just generally, I think we can even broaden the conversation, the point beyond PayPal or eBay. Few companies are able to continue to innovate at scale, and there is, especially to do it organically, is difficult when you have a business to defend, and it's also difficult to do it through acquisitions being so difficult to integrate successfully. So one of the things that eBay, I think, did very well when they bought this company called Zong, which was started by a European entrepreneur, started in Switzerland, moved to the US. eBay bought it 3 years ago to merge it with PayPal, and now that founder that I had the chance of working with is now running PayPal. So it's a big bet by basically the board of the company to put someone in charge of such a large company. David had never managed more than 100 people, and certainly is managing 13,000 people. And he's doing that extremely successfully, really by bringing a sort of entrepreneurial spirit back to a very large business. But it's not without challenges, and he's written on this publicly. Changing the culture and the speed of doing things for such a big company is for a big company in general is difficult. I just wish that there were more big companies making those bold moves. And I was just saying earlier that Priceline is a company that has made very successfully a number of acquisitions, in particular one of the most successful acquisitions and integrations in Europe by buying Booking.com, which is, I think maybe few people realize, probably one of the most successful e-commerce companies in Europe by, probably in a handful of 2 or 3, one of the largest ones in Europe. And we don't see enough big companies in Europe who are making those bold moves. And typically it's more US companies that are taking those risks. So for us as investors, it makes it much harder to back entrepreneurs and companies in Europe if we don't, in Europe, I'm integrating Israel as a broad definition of Europe. It's quite hard to invest in companies unless you get the conviction that those companies can make it outside of their local market and outside of Europe in particular, to be able to attract either public market investors or large US buyers.
Okay, thank you everybody. That's it.